Welcome everyone to this week's episode of Mastering Therapy. I have with me Dr Zandra Bamford, a clinical psychologist and certified IFS consultant. And thank you, Zandra, so much for coming on. It is a real pleasure to have
You're
you.
very welcome. Thank you for having me. Shall I launch into explaining IFS?
I think so. I think that might be a good place to start. It's been a model that has gained quite a lot of traction over the last few years. And so I see it everywhere, and I'm sure listeners will be familiar with aspects of it. But I think it's probably important that we can just briefly go back to the basics so that people can hear from someone that has walked this journey for many years, what the model is, what it involves, and how we might be able to use it.
Okay, great. Yeah. So the basic premise is this idea of multiplicity, that we all have parts, different aspects of our personality. And IFS kind of categorizes those, broadly categorizes those into protectors, two different types of protectors. So we all have managers that want us to appear likable and lovable and be successful. And our culture, our family of origin usually kind of really reinforce managers and praise them. So parts of us that are perfectionist or striving or determined to improve ourselves in certain ways. So they work proactively to try and keep us away from shame, from further experiences of failure or humiliation. And then when they aren't necessarily successful in achieving what they want to achieve, then we almost have a set of what I call backup parts, like plan B parts, firefighters, they're called in IFS. And these are more reactive. So when the pain of vulnerability gets closer to the surface, then we have these parts that might numb us out or shut us down or soothe us with alcohol or even self-harm or substances or shopping or gambling or all of the ways that we might also shift gear at the end of the day. So firefighters keep us away from vulnerability, but also work to kind of balance out excessive managers. So we might have a part that strives and works us into the ground 12 hours a day. And so we might need to have a firefighter that also creates balance some way by making us drink a bottle of wine, for example, in the evening. And then underneath that, we have our exiles, which are the parts of us that get exiled literally from the system for their own protection. And they're the ones that hold vulnerability, maybe holding beliefs of worthlessness or aloneness or feeling not good enough. And they're usually the younger parts of us that get shut away through family of origin, through peers, through culture. And we all want to be approved of and be loved and be accepted. So we will exile any aspect of our personality that isn't met with that approval or that love. And so we all have exiled parts, we all have them. And of course, the more experiences of trauma we have, the more exiles we have. And then within all of that, we have this core self, which is probably the biggest paradigm shift within IFS, the self that has the ability to heal the system, to heal the parts, to bring the exiles back in home and give them the experiences that they never had, that they missed out on. So it's a constraint release model. It's not a model of building something up. It's a model of working with the protectors, working with the parts to allow the self to emerge. Because the self kind of inherently and intuitively knows how to be with the little ones that are holding vulnerability. It's able to be with all of the vulnerability, and it's able to give it those reparative experiences. So kind of in a nutshell, that's the categories of parts himself.
That's wonderful for just breaking that down for us. Can I just ask about the core self? Is it something that has always been present in people? Or is the core self something that develops with adulthood and maturity?
Yeah, I would say that it's always there. Like, a newborn baby has lots of self-energy. It will chuckle and laugh with its whole body. It will express itself fully, but the way that it's hardwiring, I suppose, its expression is not yet developed. And that develops over time into adulthood. But it's not something that ever needs to be cultivated. It's always there naturally within us from birth. No matter how trauma-saturated our lives are, we have this within us, which is deeply hopeful for people.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah, yeah. And it kind of contradicts some of the attachment theory. Not all of it. There's lots of great things in attachment theory, but it will tell us that we need this internalized other, secure attachment. And within IFS, it says, no, we don't need that. And, I've witnessed that time and time again in my work, that people who've never had a secure attachment figure can still be that self for their inner children. It's intuitive. We all can recognize parts of us that may want one thing and another part that might want another thing. So a part that wants to go to the gym and one that wants to sit on the couch and maybe binge watch Netflix. And most people can relate to that polarity or that different stance inside. And so this idea that we have a series of different protectors that work proactively for us to achieve things in our life, to strive, to prove, to please, to caretake, to show up in a good way. And then a backup set of parts that when the proactive ones, which we call managers in IFS, don't do the job that they're intended to do. So maybe an example, I grew up in a childhood where I was criticized a lot and crushed a lot, and I developed parts that wanted to strive and prove my worth and work kind of tirelessly to get straight A's and perform really well. And when that's not successful, so for example, maybe I would fail at something and the pain of the exile would come closer to the surface. So I might have a backup set of parts, which we call firefighters, which are more reactive. Like they may shut me down or numb me out or get angry at my tutor around the failure, for example. So two kind of sets of protectors. And then the exile that would sit underneath that, who feels worthless, who feels like a failure, who feels not good enough.
Would it be right then to dissect that these protectors, they arise from a wounded part of our earlier selves?
Yeah, so in that example, the young child who was criticized and crushed gets exiled, gets kind of put away for her own safety so that she doesn't experience more humiliation or more criticism. And instead, those parts step up to make sure there's nothing to criticize, to be perfect or to show up in just the right way. And all the while, little one kind of remains stuck in that time, in that place, in that situation, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, however old, remains stuck there. And we live our lives from that place of trying to be perfect or trying to prove or strive. Yeah. And most of my clients, or many of my clients these days, are psychologists, and we all seem to have this point in our life where we step up, we become parentified children because the adults around us are not taking care of us in the way that we needed, through no fault of their own, through their own lives and their own systems. And I witness it time and time again in my work, these points where our parts either step up to care for someone around us or become very independent, kind of go it alone. And it just seems to be that there's themes around our part in this profession as well, which is really interesting and really beautiful work. I'm forever in deep respect of the people that come in my training and work with me and really go to these vulnerable places.
I'd love to come on to us talking about how IFS integrates with other therapy modalities people might be familiar with. Do you mind just saying something briefly about where IFS has come from? Because for some people, this concept of parts won't be new. There's lots of parts talk in psychoanalysis, CFT. Where did the model originate?
So Dick Schwartz was a family therapist. He was working with families. He was working with people with eating disorders. And he was noticing that in the same way there might be an outer critic, like a parent in the family that's very critical, there was also an inner critic. So he was using his systems thinking and applying it within. And he was a good scientist in that he was deeply curious with his clients and following what they were showing them. So when he invited, much in the same way as what he might invite a critical parent to leave the room, when he invited a critical part to leave the room to unblend from the system, the self would emerge time and time again. So he was following and tracking his clients, and they led him to develop the model.
And I know many people might have read the No Bad Parts book that was written, I think, about 5 years ago. I think a lot of people attribute the rise in IFS, its popularity, to that book. And if people are interested and curious about IFS, that is a really good place to start, because it really does cover a lot of this in detail. Thinking then about how it integrates with other models, because I know you're EMDR trained and you worked a lot within trauma settings, working alongside people who experience complex trauma. How do you solely use IFS? Do you merge it with EMDR or with ACT or other approaches? Do you mind just saying something about your journey? Because I think a lot of therapists work more integratively. And I'm wondering if, having done all the training that you've done, and I know that you also have your own training that you deliver for people who are wanting to understand a bit more about how IFS works in practice, I'm wondering whether you only use IFS now.
I'm quite purist these days, yes, yeah. If someone requests EMDR, then of course I will offer that. And there's a book coming out next month, actually, IFS Informed EMDR, that I've contributed to. David Polidi is the author, the editor. It's a great book. So there's lots of creative ways that it can be integrated, especially with the EMDR, and there's lots of people that do that. I kind of increasingly find that it's enough by itself. I do work very somatically, and all of the other trainings that I've done prior to IFS, they're still informing my parts. So I'll have a formulating part or an analysing part that are there, not in the foreground, but in the background, that will still kind of chip in from time to time, and it's not unhelpful. But IFS, the overriding premise is to almost replace all of that with just a deep presence and curiosity and a trust that the client has everything that they need already. So there's not really so much offering any expertise. It's more just a deep curiosity and deep presence within each moment. And really just this deep trust that everything that is within the client, everything that is needed is already within there. So that's the difference, and that's why I love it so much, and probably that's why I'm increasingly purist in my approach now.
I think part of me really loves that, and another part of me feels maybe protective of our training, as psychologists, and thinking, surely it's not just about holding presence and someone has everything that they need inside. Maybe people do need expert knowledge, and they need tools, and they need understanding, and they can't get that on their own. I'm just being honest. This is where my mind goes.
And it's a challenge
And
for some learners.
And I do worry about, these days there's so much out there that's unregulated, people calling themselves psychologists that haven't done the training. In a way, what you're saying, it is actually so simple. And a part of me feels, is there a risk that people hear something like this, or, read the No Bad Parts book and then call themselves therapists and then off they go? I wonder what your stance on that is, because there are lots of different trainings, and I think it's hard for people to know how much training do you need when you don't need the accreditation in order to practice. So what would you say to people? Let's assume they've got a therapy background. Can somebody read the No Bad Parts book and then off they go, start bringing parts into the room, interviewing them and walking someone through that?
I don't think so, no. I don't want to do the model a disservice with what I said earlier, because there is a protocol. It's head and work. It's head and heart work. There is a protocol, but it's actually very simple. Protocol, very simple. It's not easy, but it's simple. So there's a protocol that you need to know, and you need to know it kind of flip side, really. So whereby whatever people are saying, you know where you are in the protocol, and therefore you know where to go next, rather than the protocol being the thing that leads the work. So it's not protocol driven in that respect. And then there's the presence of self, which is that deep presence that I spoke about, that kind of exquisite attunement almost to the person that's with you. And the work is basically allowing the self-to-part relationship in the client. So you're facilitating their self to connect with their parts. So they're the one that's doing the healing, which is a major difference as well. And in order to be able to hold that self-presence, and in order to be able to hold the protocol, you need to experience the training that's highly experiential. Because I think you need to experience it from within to really understand it. I see a lot of comments about IFS and well-intended, but unless you've experienced it, it's very difficult to understand. So the majority of good experiential trainings will put you in the position of a client, will put you in the position of a therapist, as well as the didactic, heady learning aspects of learning the protocol, the different steps. Yeah. So, yeah, I think there is a danger with people running with it without having experienced it and without knowing their own system, their own parts that were in the show. But, the trainings that I deliver, I've just been doing one this week. It's a real roller coaster for people. I have so much respect for them because they're really going into places where they've perhaps never been before, ever, in different therapies. And it does bring up a lot of vulnerability. But that vulnerability, all of that experience from within, is what we can then use with a deeper understanding when we're with our clients. There is a saying that we can only take people as far as what we've taken ourselves, as far as what we've been ourselves. We can only sit with huge amounts of distress without grounding it away or soothing it away, if we're able to do that with ourselves as well.
Yeah, I don't think I quite realised that actually. I'm just looking at doing my IFS training. And when speaking to other people that have done it, the number one thing people say is how intense it is, but in like a positive way. But effectively, you're signing up to, understand more about parts and the protocol and how you might use it in a session. But really, you're experiencing it for yourself. You are confronting your managers, your firefighters, your exiles, and you really have to be able to do that before you can walk somebody else through that. So I guess is thinking about the training, it's worth maybe just asking a few people that have done it, because I don't know, I didn't quite realize it, that having done lots of training, I almost think of training as a bit of a day off. It's quite nice to put different clothes on and get in a different mode. But from what I've heard, go with tissues, basically.
Lots, yeah. My level 1 was a lot of sobbing all the way through. But from that, a lot of growth, a lot of transformation, a lot of just huge changes in my life that still are here now. So definitely worthwhile. But yeah, it takes courage.
Before we jump into a demonstration, I did have a few questions just from my own reading and seeing questions that people have asked. And if there are terms that people are unfamiliar with, because IFS is full, more just like everything, being a psychologist, or, there are so many different acronyms and phrases. You've mentioned a few, self-energy, unburdening. So it might be that people need to look these up. I just had a question about the protector parts. So this is something that I've noticed when protector parts come up for people. My experience is that to feel warm towards them, to bring a sense of compassion and kindness to protector parts, feels easier than bringing that to a more critical part. And I have found this for myself also. Thinking about a protector wanting the best for us, caring about us, but just maybe doing it in a way that isn't always so helpful. I find people can get on board with that. But with the critical part, when a part of somebody is so unkind to them, or so belittling, shaming, blaming, whatever it is, it has been a lot harder to see that as no bad part. I definitely have found that for myself. I just wondered, how do you help someone to see also that critical part as being important?
It's such a good question. It really makes sense, doesn't it, that there's a part in the system that reacts to the critic that doesn't like it because it feels uncomfortable. But that would be another part. So the self would be able to just be with it and allow it and accept it and welcome it just as it is. So we would try to unblend the part that is reacting, so we can release that self-energy and get to know the critic from that place. Because parts are never what they first theme. So almost the harsher it is, a harsh critic will usually just be full of love for the one that it's protecting, but it's not learned any other way to point it out. It will want success for the person. It will want growth. And it may have to be more harsh or more critical than the original critical parent, for example, to prevent the shame and humiliation of the little one, if that makes sense. So it may have to be even more extreme than that. And they often don't choose these roles, they don't want to do that. So when they're presented with an alternative, which is that the part that holds the shame and the humiliation and the feelings of worthlessness can be healed from that and can release those burdens, when we ask the critic, what does it mean for them, that they want that. They want to give up this role. They want to relinquish the role and choose another role. So if we can't unblend the part that's reacting to the critic, which is not unusual, then it's our self that's important as a therapist, and this is where our personal work is really important. So then we are the self that's talking to the critic, and we can talk to it directly. And we know that all the other parts are listening, and they get to hear the truth about the critic's intentions, that it wants good things for the person, that it's really 7 years old, it's been doing this for a long time, it doesn't want to do it, it's exhausted, or it fears if it didn't do this, there would be collapse or chaos, or a lot of feeling of being crushed in the system. We hear the intentions, we hear the fears, and the other parts get to hear that. So then when we come back to the client and we ask them how do they feel towards the critic now, it often shifts. The parts have often unblended by themselves and they feel, I get it, I really get it. I understand it, I feel warmth, I feel care.
When you intervene, Zandra, are you intervening just as you're talking to me now? You're very softly spoken and warm, and do you intervene as you? I'm drawing on some training that I did way back. And I remember when the therapist intervenes, it's really important. I think the phrase was that they win the not argument, but it's really important that you win the interaction, that you have the upper hand as the therapist. And so do you ever go in firm, or is it always gentle?
Almost always gentle, almost always, because there's no need to, there's no need to have the upper hand, because the parts are in charge of the process. They set the pacing of the work. If we override them, we're going to get backlash. We're going to get firefighters, self-harm, or suicide with suicidal thoughts coming in to try to protect, because we're going to go to vulnerability too quickly. So we want protectors to know that they're fully in charge of the process, because they've been protecting for decades often. We can't win them over. It's completely up to them. But with curiosity, with really deeply understanding them and offering them an alternative, that there is an alternative, there is a self that can really help and offer something different, they choose themselves to take that because they don't want it. So we don't need to override them. We don't need to be firm. I mean, there might be the odd occasion if we're with an exile, for example, who's very vulnerable, and a critic comes back in, even though it's agreed in the first place, we might be a tiny bit more firm and say, can that critic go off back into the waiting room, for example, because we don't want the vulnerability to be exposed to that some more. But that's unusual, because we're not going to go to the vulnerability until the protectors have agreed in the first place and fully given permission. So I find that parts relaxed when we, in every cell, I know that they're good and that they're offering something good to the system. And there's nothing for them to fight me against there, because I've no agenda. I'm just going to be with them just as they are. And if I had a strong agenda, the likelihood is that they're going to protect even more and put the brakes on even more.
Yeah. And I'm sure people can relate to that, whatever model that you're using, when you try and go to a place and someone's really resistant, and it might be because it's too soon. I'm thinking when I had some cat therapy when I was doing my training, and my therapist, I think it was session 2, I don't know if she was getting frustrated with me because maybe I wasn't spilling everything immediately. But she said, "What's the worst thing that's ever happened to you?" And this was in session 2. And walls went up. And then I was really like, I don't think you should be asking me that. Obviously, like, my protectors came in. So I think that's helpful in, people being able to think what is going on for somebody. Like, the resistance sometimes might be frustrating as therapists. It might, because we can acknowledge this is maybe blocking the work, and you might be able to see a lane to go down that the client isn't willing. But it's really important to have the skills to be able to enable those protectors to relax and to trust you. And that does take time, doesn't it? It doesn't usually happen session
It can
1.
take time, yeah, that's right. And resistance is just protection. It's just protectors doing exactly what they're designed to do, and until they trust the therapist and trust the model and trust the self of the client, they're not going to allow, because they're guarding these precious little ones. So, protection, they're protected. Yeah, so language of resistance isn't, you won't hear that in IFS, because it doesn't really make sense.
And is that all done through interviewing? Do you tend to incorporate chair work or letters to various different parts? I wonder what the different formats of unloading are.
Yeah, well, there's an unburdening kind of ritual, which would involve witnessing the experience, really being with the exile who holds those experiences and witnessing. And in terms of the critical parts that we were talking about, we can take that legacy energy back to the original owner. We can unload it using a ritual that we would also use with exiles, and it often is internal. It's not just through interview. The interview, where the self of the therapist is speaking to the part, is usually just as a temporary hold-in until there's enough self-energy in the client to take over that work. Because the whole premise of the work is the self-to-part relationship. It's that there's an inner leader who has the ability to do all of the healing, and we want to pass that back to the client as soon as possible, really. So they are the one that does all the healing and supports the parts to release what was never theirs or no longer serves them.
Yeah, okay. Another question that came to me around the critic. Often if someone has experienced a lot of trauma and been like the victim of abuse, whether that's physical or verbal, I guess I've always thought about the idea that this narrative that they have maybe isn't actually their narrative at all. It's the narrative of the aggressor or the abuser. And so I struggle a bit when then thinking about this critic being vulnerable, because how do you dissect, is that the voice of the abuser, or is that the client's like inner child?
The critic, yeah. So, yeah, taking on some of the energy of the perpetrator, yeah. So that can happen, can't it? And it feels like that's what you're speaking to. And a part that maybe sees who has the power in the room at the moment. It's this person, and this is how they have the power. So I'm going to take some of that on and take some of that energy on. And even when we can hear it in the therapy, we can hear words that don't quite sound like the client's words. They sound like somebody from the outside, yeah. So we have a way to release that within the work, a way to release the energy that was never the parts in the first place. And that piece about parts not being what they first appear to be is really important. And just like us, we're not going to reveal our inner selves. We're not going to reveal who we are when we're with someone who we experience as being judgmental or who dislikes us. So unblending those other parts that respond to that critic is really important. And one way that we can also do this is by using a container. So having the part in a glass room, for example, where we can get to know it from that place. And that really helps the ones reacting to it, the ones disliking it or avoiding it and not wanting it around to soften back so we can get to know it from an open-hearted place of curiosity. But it's a really helpful technique also for people who hear voices, for voices that can also often be conceptualized as parts. So taking the example of perhaps a demonic voice, we can have that in a container. We can get to know it from that place. It allows the voice to be known with more openness, and the ones that are fearful of it or avoid it or even appease it and go along with what it says can step back and give the person some space. And when we get to know it from that place, we often learn that it also is young. Maybe it's 7 years old and it too has good intentions. So I've found IFS to be a tremendously helpful way of working with voices, where there's a constellation of other parts we're reacting to. And I've found that not only are parts more extreme and voices more extreme when there's lots of trauma in the person's life, but also when we're not listening. So parts, voices taking on more extreme ways of getting heard, of being known in the system and becoming demonic is a really successful way of stopping and making someone listen. And again, when we befriend it from that self-energy, we learn that it is that inner 7-year-old who has good intentions, who has its own interests, its own needs, and also needs care, needs looking after, and needs being known. So we get to do that, and then it transforms. It's no longer demonic, it's just an inner 7-year-old.
Yeah, wow. I think back to your earlier point on the training, just that example shows how deep this work can go and how important it is that the therapist has the expertise to be able to hold that. And it's a good reminder not to argue with the critic or even to judge it, because I think it can feel quite painful at times when you hear some of the things that clients say of themselves. And I know I have felt very protective and find it really hard to listen to a client that might really dislike themselves. But there's a lot of hope, isn't there, in being able to support someone to contain it and unblend from that part. And a real significant step for somebody to see themselves as that 7-year-old. Thank you for sharing that. When you say energy, do you mind just expanding on that? Because I think more and more people are getting familiar with this idea of the body and our whole body, mind, spirit, energy. But some people then might be thinking, what are you talking about? What do you mean by energy?
Well, I kind of increasingly feel that everything is energy, really, but that could be taken on in the form of words or in the form of bodily sensations or whatever the part is adopted, really. But yeah, an energy exchange, and the energy of self, if you like, can be felt as well. You could think of it scientifically, couldn't you? You could think of it in terms of neuroception and how our bodies pick up unconsciously on the different nervous systems that are around us, or you could think of it more spiritually. We tend to lean towards the more spiritual side these days, but yeah, we're exchanging energies kind of all of the time.
Yeah. And with these various different parts, when you're with a client and introducing them to this kind of concept, is there a bit of kind of education in the initial stages? Are you, just as you did with us at the beginning, talking through these different parts, do you formulate in that kind of more traditional sense where you might get them to think about the various different parts of themselves? Or are you in the work and the parts emerge and then you're labeling them for the client? Does the client label them for themselves?
People usually come, it's usually our managers that bring us into therapy because they want to improve us or sort out the drinking, or a relationship has gone wrong. They want us to be better in some area of our life. So they usually have a story that they tell us about why they're there, why the client's there, and then just listening really carefully to that story and unpicking the parts and reflecting them back and finding a starting point. So in my mind, there's no need for an assessment, which is another thing that often alarms parts of psychologists.
Yeah, no, I love this. This is it because it is different.
Yeah.
It's very
I
different.
mean, we do.
So it's really
We
good to
want to
hear
know
about
about
it.
risk. We want to know about risky firefighters, because if they're in the system, we want those on board with the work first. We want to work with them first. But we don't need to know the full chronology unless there is a part that wants to give us that. We don't need a formulation, because if we were to do that, if we were to do an assessment, it's usually one-dimensional. It's usually a manager that has a certain story that will be able to tell us the information about the person's life, or a narrating part. But it's not until we listen to the other parts that we really get to hear what it's all about. So it doesn't happen. We just kind of, well, I personally just launch in. I'll listen to why they're there. I'll pick the parts, reflect them back, and to see where they want to start. And maybe you and I will do that together. We will just start somewhere.
Yeah.
And so the first session for me certainly looks like a piece of work. Yeah.
It might be helpful for people to hear if they've started to dip their toe into IFS, maybe they've read the book and they've listened to some podcasts. What is the next step? Because the level 1 IFS training is quite expensive. So you're looking at £4,000 plus. And then you do your level 2, and then to become accredited, you have to have supervision and much like something like EMDR, it's not unusual, but it's quite a lengthy, involved process. Are there other trainings? I know that you run a training, and are there any things that people should be looking for if they're doing kind of 1-day workshops or 3-day workshops of
Yeah, I
IFS?
would caution against, well, I suppose nothing's unhelpful, but there's certain things that are going to just engage the head, the cognitive parts more, like pre-recorded kind of didactic workshops. I really feel, as I was saying before, that you have to experience it for all the reasons I described. So to look out for something that's really experiential. So yeah, I do a 10-day training, and we have supporters that come in who are IFS trained, and they'll sit in small practice groups, and people will rotate from client to therapist to observer roles and get to experience it from within. And the level 1 certainly does that as well, offers all of that. So to look out for something that's live and something that's experiential, something that offers demonstrations as well as the didactic components.
Great. And do you offer therapy? You mentioned that you work a lot with psychologists. Do you offer therapy if people want therapy with you? Or do people find out more information
They
about
could
you?
go to my website, they could reach out for therapy, and I probably will be signposting though. Yeah. I do run retreats with psychologists, and that's on the website if people wanted something that's more written.
Is that only psychologists, or would that be
Yeah,
counsellors,
vast
people?
majority, but yeah, other therapists, counsellors, psychiatrists even, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Great. Great. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to get myself comfortable. So, what I think might be helpful for me, but also to demonstrate it, is right now I'm in Ibiza at the moment,
Oh,
Zandra, and since January I have been travelling the world with my husband and my 2 kids. And we had a very nice life in Bristol. We had a lovely house we'd renovated. I had a lovely job in the NHS. And in the last 2 years, I've really ripped up the rule book, as I say. And I think there's this quest within me for freedom and expansion and consistent dopamine hits of life. And yet, I'm 10 months into this now, and it's hard. I'm finding it hard. So I look out my window, I can see the sea, palm trees, it's beautiful. And yet, there's this other part of me that just says, what have you done? And
mm,
I really question whether we have been wise with decisions that we've made, and have a lot of regret at times. And it's just, it's so extreme, the desire for that stability and routine, and yet when I'm in it I just want to break out of it. So there are two conflicting parts there that
Wow.
might be helpful to think through.
Yeah, that sounds great. That sounds like a great exploration. Okay, so the majority of the exploration is usually done inside, with eyes closed. How would that be? Just to, support you,
Yeah,
just to kind of,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
but feel enough for now, Natalie.
yeah,
Yeah, just
yeah.
really thank them. Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you. Yeah,
Yeah, it's great to experience that. I wonder what it's like for people listening, just even hearing the language that you use, the way that you um, talk to them. You're getting them to kind of interview each other, but it doesn't feel like an interview. That's what has surprised me. If I've read anything about IFS, it's, what age is it? When did it first show up? It can feel a bit linear, but that felt very natural. It didn't feel like, okay, ask these sets of questions. It felt like a conversation.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think that's the piece that I was speaking to earlier about how it does just kind of flow, and it does feel just like an effortless, enjoyable interaction and conversation. That's not to say it's, clients don't feel the pain of the vulnerability at times, because they do, but it's always an experience of being with, um,
Yeah.
rather than parts kind of hijacking and taking over completely.
Yeah, I would say what I noticed is how many different directions, like initially when we started, the emotion was really quite there. I think maybe if part of me wasn't aware, probably
Right.
that like regret part really is quite deep. And I
Yeah.
probably could have started sobbing or something like that. I could really feel it. And by the end, that had lessened quite significantly, which is interesting.
Yeah, and
Um,
often, yeah, I mean that's not unusual for the vulnerability to come to this.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's such a different pace as well, Zandra. Just thinking of some of the other models, and maybe this is also your style because you are very soft and it's slow. It didn't feel like, right, we're rushing through this. It felt like we had all the time in the world.
yeah. There's a lovely saying. Osnat Arabelle says, "Slowly gets there quickly." I think it's her that it comes from.
Mm,
Slowly gets there quickly, and it feels gentle and slow, but yet, as you noticed, it can be powerful. So you
mm,
maybe had some parts that were just keeping that vulnerability at bay, and
I'm
would
sure.
make sense. And but had that, you got a taste of how, yes, it's slow, but you can also get to the places in a
Mm,
quicker way often, which is the paradox. So yeah,
yeah.
thank you for doing that,
Well,
demonstrating.
is
Um,
there is there anything else you want to add that you think is important? Obviously, this is just a very much light touch into IFS for people that they can
yeah,
spark their interest.
I would just encourage people to pursue it, because I think, because of the points that I was naming earlier, how we come into the profession in the first place. And in a way, I think our doctorate training, rewards our managers. I have so much respect for the training and the profession, but it does reward the managers, because we have to jump through so many hoops to get into it. So it's no surprise that we have these really hardworking manager
Mm,
parts, that get through all the hoops, because they are the ones that got us there in the first place, if that makes sense. And so in our profession, we have parts that are exhausted often and work tirelessly
mm,
and struggle to switch off, and um, full of that, what we call imposter syndrome. And of course, that's all parts. And I suppose my message is that it doesn't have to be like that. And I say that, from my personal life as well, and the transformations that IFS has brought me personally. It doesn't have to be like that. So I would encourage people to pursue it, if not just for themselves. In fact, pursuing it for ourselves first is really the best way anyway.
Yeah.
So much goodness can come from that. And we just get to drop our shoulders and just approach things in a much more relaxed way, in a way that's more joyful and wholesome and less exhausting. So that would be my message.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been great to have you on.
Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Mastering Therapy. All of the resources mentioned are available in the show notes. If you're interested in getting more information on what's been covered this season, you can sign up to our mailing list or visit the website masteringtherapy.com. If you've listened to this and you've thought of someone you think would be great to interview on the podcast, submit a recommendation on the website. I'd love to hear from you. The Mastering Therapy podcast and the information provided by me and my guests is solely intended for qualified professionals for information and educational purposes. I look forward to you joining me next time.